It's going to be hard to make a profitable business selling food through the mail, right? Either you're losing money on the sale because you're paying for the shipping, or they're paying for the shipping and then they're paying like 2 or 3 times what it would cost in a grocery store because they have this big shipping bill.
Krishna Kalyan was sick of eating eggs for breakfast. As a diabetic, he could no longer have cereal. So he created his own. He launched Catalina Crunch after identifying a massive gap in low sugar, high protein breakfast foods and scaled it into a multi-million-dollar business sold across major national retailers. Today, Catalina Crunch is redefining what everyday pantry staples look like for a new generation of consumers.
If you can't make it taste good enough, maybe it's just not the right time for that product. If you personally are not going to eat it, then you can't be selling it, right? Even if you are personally going to eat it, that doesn't mean that it's good enough. I would not just try to spend a lot of money on D2C and grow that way simply because other brands were successful doing it or because some person told me to do it. I really have to see the logic behind it, right?
A drone is about to deliver your lunch, and you won't pay a penny extra for it. In commerce news, Mana Air Delivery just raised $50 million, and they're not testing anymore. They've already completed 250,000 real drone deliveries. They're backed by the same investors behind Tesla, SpaceX, and OpenAI, and they're building up to 40 drone bases across America. And they're already inside the apps you use every day: DoorDash, Uber, Just Eat. And the part that nobody's talking about, Mana once delivered a defibrillator to a cardiac arrest victim in under 4 minutes. It's not just convenience, that's a life saved by a drone. And Grubhub just made history. New Jersey got its first ever commercial drone food delivery. No extra fees, no driver, just your meal dropped at your door from the sky. This is no longer science fiction. The infrastructure is being built right now, maybe in your neighborhood, whether you've noticed or not. So maybe in the near future, next time you open a delivery app, look up. Your order might already be on its way. Krishna, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for coming. This is such a treat. Big fan of Catalina. So from the very beginning, when did you first learn about pea protein?
I think I first learned about pea protein years before starting Catalina Crunch. I probably first had it in like the maybe like 2007, 2008, something like that. I was in high school and starting to go to the gym, start to take protein powders. And I remember at first, I think just buying like whey or milk or something like that, and then realizing, oh, there are all these other plant-based protein powders. And my dad was a vegan, and so he encouraged me to get into that. And so I think I tried pea, and I tried hemp, and I tried soy and pumpkin. I tried a whole bunch of them.
So when did you start experimenting with pea, and how did you land on pea as a primary ingredient?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we go back to Catalina Crunch, right? So I launched Catalina Crunch in 2018. And prior to launching the business, I had been baking my own cereal and eating it for breakfast with almond milk. I'd been doing that for several months and not really actually thinking of turning it into a business. And when I first started down this journey of basically meal prepping and baking for my own type 1 diabetes, that's when I started going to GNC, and I got interested in basically baking with protein powders and other alternative ingredients. And so I tried all sorts of protein powders, as well as almond flour, coconut flour, all that sort of stuff. And so that was probably like early 2018.
Got it. That's really helpful. And I mean, talk to me about also just getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and the change that you had to do for that.
Yeah. Yep. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes about 10 years before I started Catalina Crunch. I was a senior in high school, going into my freshman year of college. And I basically was actually at college going through a new student orientation day kind of thing, collapsed, went to the ER. That's when I found out I had diabetes. When you have type 1 diabetes, you get a dietitian that's kind of specialized in type 1 diabetes. And they teach you how to count carbs and then how to take insulin based on how many carbs you had eaten. And then you have a blood glucometer that tracks your glucose. And you have these pens where you inject yourself with insulin. and you're kind of constantly balancing that, right? And so that was like 2008, 2009, something around there. And when I was diagnosed, I first realized, well, first I rebelled a little bit, and I didn't want to believe that I had it, and kind of I didn't throw the insulin away, but I didn't want to do anything with it. I didn't want to inject myself, etc. Your body quickly pulls you back into compliance because you can't go too high or too low too quickly without realizing that you need to change. And then I started to realize, if I eat things that are high in protein, high in fiber, low in sugar, it's a lot easier to keep my blood sugar in check, also stay in good shape. It keeps strong mental clarity throughout the day, a whole bunch of good benefits. And so I'd say like early 2009 was really when I started on that journey. I would eat eggs every day for breakfast, snack on nothing but nuts. And I did that for about 10 years straight.
Wow. And it was I'd imagine it was quite the lifestyle. I mean, the lifestyle change in terms of what you were eating before that prior.
Yes. Yeah. I grew up eating the classic American, staples, and loving, I love going to the supermarket with my mom to shop. And especially in, I think like the 90s and 2000s, there was a ton of exciting innovation in foods, as there always is. Right. So I think growing up, ate a lot of bagel bites and pizza rolls, also just the normal stuff, the Cinnamon Toast Crunches of the world, and Cocoa Puffs and Chex Mix and Coke, all the stuff that a kid growing up in America would eat.
What compelled you to start cooking?
I mean, it was mostly diabetes. As a type 1 diabetic, if you eat something different every day, and especially if you eat things that are higher in carbs, or if you go out and then you're eating it like you're eating at a restaurant or even like a fast casual restaurant, you don't know what's necessarily in the sauce, etc. It's hard to know how much insulin to take, and you frequently have to take more. So I started basically meal prepping, right? And if you keep eating it, if you prepare the food yourself, you know exactly what's in it. You don't have to guess as to what someone else put in it. And it makes it a lot easier to be consistent with your dosing.
And what was interesting to you about cereal, or how did you get to start baking your own and making your own cereal?
Yeah. It was mainly, I was trying to, I'd been eating eggs for about 10 years.
Yeah. Was that not cutting anymore? Were you a bit sick of eggs?
I was a bit sick of eggs. I didn't love the texture. I didn't love the eggs are great, right? They're freaking amazing. But when you eat them every day, it gets a little boring. And so, yeah, I tried 100 different hot sauces and other sorts of sauces, and eventually just kind of decided, you know what, I gotta do something different. And, I loved cereal growing up, right? You have chocolatey, cinnamon, like great flavors. You have the crispy crunchiness of it. It goes great in a bowl of milk. It's very convenient, right? Like in the morning. And obviously it's not super expensive either. So, I just really loved it, and that's what got me interested in making it again.
And talk a little bit about that journey and what you started experimenting in creating your own high protein and, of course, low sugar cereal. What were different kind of ingredients that you experimented with? And you kind of eventually end up
This episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much under-delivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand-beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadhva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the Consider VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes.
Yeah. I experimented with all sorts of stuff. Pretty much every protein powder that you can buy, whether it's whey or milk or pea or soy, hemp, pumpkin, rice, the list goes on. I got some stuff off Amazon like almond flour and coconut flour. I think there were a handful of other things like that I don't remember at this moment. And I kind of just went to work trying to make something that tasted like what I grew up eating. The hardest thing I found right off the bat was when you bake with protein powders, they typically tend to make your food really dense, or like they create weird textures that you wouldn't even know were possible if you didn't cook, right? Like dense foods, rubbery dense foods that are like crispy on the first bite, but then they're like rubbery afterwards. Like all this stuff that I think the chefs and other people that make food like kind of like they hide that stuff from you, all the failed recipes, right? So I tried a lot of different stuff, and a lot of these protein powders taste different as well. So if you're trying to make a cinnamon flavored cereal and you're using some hemp protein, you start to get these kind of like hempy notes in there with it, and it's like it doesn't taste exactly what you're looking for, right? And so I spent a lot of time. I eventually landed on pea protein for a few reasons. I mean, one, I think it was helping me when I was baking to create like a relatively crispy, crunchy profile for the texture. It didn't taste crazy. Some of the like milks and wheys could taste pretty bitter, whereas some of the other ones like hemp could taste pretty like grassy, beany, kind of weird, right? And it wasn't like crazy expensive either, so that we could make a cereal at a reasonable price point.
Got it. That's helpful. But even before the price point, I guess, talk or even turning this into a business. Mm-hmm. I know you were doing this for yourself and creating maybe a cereal that you can actually have for yourself, since you couldn't have cereal anymore. What was that moment that you thought, hey, maybe this could be a business, and maybe this could be a product that's not just for me, but other people might also like it?
Yeah. Well, so I was actually at the park, and in New York. I was living in Manhattan. I was meeting a friend in Central Park, and he was funny enough also looking to eat more protein for breakfast. It was kind of on his own health journey. He was not diabetic, but nevertheless was trying to eat more protein and really get healthier. And so he told me he was sick of eating eggs every day because he'd been eating eggs for a long time. And I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. That's like the same thing that I've been dealing with. And so I made him some cereal, gave it to him in a baggie. He really enjoyed it, and he actually Venmo'd me for it. And I hadn't asked him to pay me for it. I hadn't really thought about that. But when he did, and it was a great gesture, obviously, it kind of a light bulb went off in my head, which is like, oh, you could actually make and sell food products, right? I hadn't really thought about that before. And that's when I kind of started to think about, oh, does this make sense as a business as opposed to just me baking, as like on the weekends as a meal prepping sort of thing, right? And there were a lot of things that became exciting about it. One was I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I was very highly motivated and felt really strongly that this should exist, right? And the reason why I had started baking in the first place was because I'd gone to the grocery store and I couldn't find something like this in the store, right? There were a ton of cereals on shelf, but most of them or nearly all of them were based in either 100% starch, really, sugar and starch, right? So like corn, rice, wheat, coated in sugar, if they tasted good, or things that were like 100% wheat stuff that tasted very bad. And so there wasn't really an option like this. I had known and been seeing that the obesity rate in the country, right in America, had been climbing for decades. And I felt there was a big opportunity to help people and help them eat healthier, help them take care of themselves, help them stay in shape. And so that was all very exciting to me.
Yeah, I thought what was that's really interesting, because I was gonna ask, how did you know or think about markets? In that, do you think there was a bigger market than only people who happen to be diabetics, right?
Mm-hmm,
in terms of this cereal. But it seems like from your friend who was, not a diabetic, but is beyond that scope, And then as well as this thought that, okay, maybe in general, people actually want to eat, more quote unquote healthy or, higher protein and fiber into their lives and not have these kind of sugary cereals, which are kind of like candy for breakfast, if that's fair to say. So that is really interesting how it seems like that conversation also saw that kind of made you realize that maybe, hey, there's a bigger opportunity here beyond if I were to start a business, there's actually quite a big opportunity here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, when I grew up, my dad was he was your classic health nut, kind of shopping at Mother's Market, buying all this stuff that was made with black beans and didn't taste good and came in a brown paper bag. Right. And so I was not, I tried to stay 10 feet away from that and his stuff whenever I could. So I didn't necessarily think of this as a big market per se. But when I realized how quickly the rates of not just, not type 1 diabetes, which is genetic, right? But type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes, LADA, and pre-diabetes were growing, that actually now is over half of the American population. And so it's huge, right? And then you look at adjacencies like added sugars and how that can contribute to symptoms around IBS, IBD, or kids that have ADHD, et cetera. In addition to, as you said, people that are just kind of philosophically trying to eat healthier, but don't have any specific health condition. I was like, yeah, this is actually a majority of the population that either should be eating this or would have an interest in eating it, right? So I felt good about the size.
So once you walk me to that moment too about when you actually realized that this was, hey, I'd imagine it was talking to your friend and once your friend Venmo you for that first transaction, but once you decided, hey, this is actually, there's a business opportunity here and at least my buddy liked my product, I like my product, more people maybe like my product. Talk about the next steps for you in terms of turning that into reality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I first had launched a website and put it online. I thought that, I was baking it in my kitchen. I had 5 racks in the oven. I ever only used 1 rack. And so I thought it'd be easy to make a lot of cereal in my apartment. It turns out that you can't make cereal that quickly. And as soon as the orders start coming in, you're like, holy crap, this is a lot versus what I can make. So I hadn't necessarily thought that through too well, but it really proved out the demand for it, right? I think when I first put the website online, there was someone who was like shared it in some sort of like type 1 diabetic support group or something like that on Facebook, and I got like 100 orders in one day, and then I had a bunch of emails to respond to and stuff like that. So that was how I first launched it, and I felt really good about it based on that kind of like early consumer feedback. And it wasn't just the number of orders, but it was also the depth of interest as well. So I started talking to some of the folks that were buying it. I was like, oh man, these people really want this. They don't just like kind of want this. They've been, one person was planning a trip to Singapore and they had never even had the cereal yet because they just placed an order. And the guy was asking if he could buy like 2 suitcases worth so that he could take it with him for his whole trip. There are other people that talked about how they had wanted a cereal like this for years, but it had never existed. And so they'd just been missing it for a long time. Like people wrote in with very long emails. And so that's when I really kind of felt the pull, so to speak. And I really felt that it was something that it was exciting a lot of people. And that's what kind of got me to dive in further.
Amazing. So at what point did you decide, all right, we need to actually go and find a co-man and have to expand outside of your kitchen?
Yeah. Well, I went to a commercial kitchen. I had no background in CPG prior to this, so I had no, I guess, idea that co-mans existed or there was such a concept as a co-man. And so it might sound strange to people who have experience in the industry, but that idea hadn't crossed my mind. So anyway, I went to a commercial kitchen. There I got this like late night kind of graveyard shift. I think it was like 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. or something like that. Was able to make more cereal out of the kitchen. but it really wasn't enough. And so that's when I kind of started to put some math to the amount of cereal I was making and actually look at like how much I could make over time and how long it would last, et cetera. And I realized, oh, okay, now I'm going to have to go make this at a larger scale. Right. And so I went to,
do you find that there was like a certain revenue threshold or just, number of messages inbound that you were receiving, or just sales volume that you felt, okay, now this is too much to actually stay and actually doing it myself, and actually I need to actually shift towards a co-man?
Yeah. I mean, it was hard making the cereal in a commercial kitchen. I think when I was doing something like 50 orders a day or something like that, it was already way too much to do in the commercial kitchen. And I was keep going in stock, out of stock, that sort of thing. And so that's when I went and I actually got lucky. There was an upcoming course at Texas A&M on cereal extrusion and other methods of making cereal. It kind of walked through how General Mills, Post, and Kellogg's made cereal. And so I went to attend that course as a way of learning more about how to make cereal.
Got it. That's helpful. And what were your so walk me through as well, what was the first impressions, because it was the first time doing a consumer brand, I believe. What was your first impressions of D2C as a sales channel and thinking about growing via online?
Yeah, I was very excited about it. I was broadly aware. I was more aware of D2C than I was of CPG. And so I was aware of some of the benefits of D2C as talked about by folks like the founder of BarkBox or the founder of Dollar Shave Club, or other sorts of businesses that had been in this space, if not in food, right? And so I was excited about it from the perspective of being able to sell directly to consumers rather than through retailers. The ability to talk then directly to those consumers, to learn directly from those consumers, those sorts of things, and just to really accelerate the process, right? Because it can take a year to get your product into a retailer, and it can take longer if you're a new brand and you don't have any distribution, and so you don't have distributors set up, and yada yada yada. And so that was really exciting for me. I think at the time, social media was growing, was obviously very big, but I don't think that necessarily all the brands had conceived of or realized that. And so there was an opportunity to acquire customers from social media at a relatively low cost, which made it, all the more exciting.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's incredible. And yes, obviously, and we'll get to it, that the landscape for e-commerce has certainly changed regarding social media, where it was in 2017, 2018. At what point did you think about raising capital for Catalina?
Yeah, it was during that switch from doing it in the commercial kitchen to doing it at scale, right? That's when I realized, it's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars a day because this equipment is so big just to get the ingredients to try making the cereal. And so we're going to, need some money for that. And then I had wanted, I had wanted to hire a small team as well, right? At least one person that could help out with marketing, one person that could help out with operations and finance, one person that could help out with sales. And so that's when I felt it made sense to raise some money to make that happen.
And what was the approach when it came to raising capital from your side?
Yeah. So I ended up raising from a friend of mine from college, who then introduced me to other kind of angel investors and mainly angel investors, high net worth individuals, those types, and raising money. We raised about $800,000 in total or something like that. I'm really grateful for those individuals. I think it was great to have raised from angel investors and high net worth individuals for a couple of reasons. One, they were my friends. They were people that I knew. And so, there was a strong, there would have been anyways, but it just added to my already overwhelming motivation to make sure that this was successful. So I think that was great. Two, I actually had a large number of smaller checks. And so no one, for better and for worse, no one investor, I think, necessarily cared so much about how I did or didn't. And so I didn't have any overwhelmingly strong personalities trying to push me in any one direction as to how I ran the business, which kind of freed me up to run the business in the way that I felt was best.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I imagine too, since you raised from angels, they were maybe a lot more flexible when it came to their timelines versus raising from an institutional fund.
Yeah. I mean, I do think early stage VCs can move pretty quickly in general, depending on where you are. But yeah, angels certainly, it's like they know someone else is investing in your business. The business makes sense to them. They'd like to see it succeed. Like, they like you. They can be in 48 hours, right?
Yeah.
And this episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much underdelivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadhva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the Consider VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes.
And was the plan initially to grow and scale on D2C? I mean, I know that obviously you're in so many retail stores and have such a massive retail footprint. But at what point did you feel like at some point that you kind of tapped out when it came to D2C?
Yeah. There were a couple of things. Yeah. So originally, my pie in the sky view in my head was just to sell D2C. And similar to like a Dollar Shave Club, get into the 9 figures just selling D2C. And I quickly realized that wasn't going to happen. There were a couple of things that happened. One, I had this great advisor early on. I was entering a totally new industry and was very lucky to have found this individual. But he was pushing me to go into retail and to consider retail. And two, I realized D2C, I think, works well when your shipping costs are a low percentage of your total order value, right? And so, it has that impact where like when we're selling cereal, right, or like a snack, these are things that are not super expensive where the cost of shipping can exceed the cost of the product, right? And so you want someone to buy your snack from your website, either you're losing money on the sale because you're paying for the shipping, which is something you might decide to do because everything's, there's no shipping costs on Amazon. And if you want to compete with Amazon, you're going to have to realize that, right? Or they're paying for the shipping and then they're paying like 2 or 3 times what it would cost in a grocery store because they have this big shipping bill, right? Or you have them buy 6 units at a time or 4 at a time or whatever. And then the shipping cost can be taken out of the margin. But in that case, it's still like now they have a high MOQ effectively, right? And it's not like, oh, you can try this new cereal brand. It's like you got to try this new cereal brand and buy 4 of these things at the same time, which adds risk if you don't like it, right? So doing that math, I quickly saw, hey, it's going to be hard to make a profitable business selling food through the mail, right? And then I started to think about, well, how can we make it more cost effective? And I started to invent in my head this idea of basically neighbors coming together, creating their own sort of buying groups. And I would ship them like a pallet of it. And then they would all go get some. And I was like, that would actually work really well. And also, that sounds like a grocery store, right? And so I was like, all right, I just reinvented the concept of a grocery store. It should just go through grocery stores. And so that's how I really focused, came to realize, okay, retail is going to be a big part of this. And obviously, retail has been a big part of our journey from there.
But at this point, blitz scaling online, that was huge. That was maybe what, a lot of brands were doing at the time, because
Mm-hmm.
ads back then were your CAC back then was so cheap. And I'd imagine that your investors were probably pushing for you to go and scale D2C.
Yep.
Why didn't you? And were you actually ever tempted? And what was it like kind of pushing back?
Yeah. Well, so it goes back to, I think, the composition of our cap table, right? We had many small checks. And so no one investor, I think, really cared all that much. I had one main investor, my friend, who cared, but I don't think that like he had many investments, et cetera, right? And even for him, it wasn't a big investment. So no one was going to argue with me or ad infinitum about what the right way to do it was. So that was part one. Part two, I'm naturally the type of person where if I don't understand why, the reasoning behind doing something, I'm very unlikely to, I would say, just blindly follow the advice of someone else or do something because they're saying to do it. And I think that's just a part of my personality. I think there are pros and cons to that aspect of my personality, but regardless, I would not just, try to spend a lot of money on D2C and grow that way simply because other brands were successful doing it or because some person told me to do it. I really have to see the logic behind it, right? And as I kind of analyzed the logic behind it, I felt unless we were going to get to a Amazon-like scale, right, which we were not, that it was really highly infeasible for that to make sense.
So once you realized, okay, grocery, that's now not our new path, but an additional sales channel that we want to explore and really kind of go hard on.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first step with grocery? Was it going through the natural channel, or what was kind of that route to market?
Yeah. So I had first actually tried to, so Whole Foods, right, was probably the grocery store that I went to shop at the most, that I liked. So I had reached out to the buyer at Whole Foods. This woman was fantastic. I think that the Whole Foods buyers in general, they're looking for new up and coming stuff, right? I mean, they're not just trying to buy more of stuff from the big CPG companies. She realized the potential in the product, I would say, and really championed it in bringing it into Whole Foods. So that's how I got started in retail. It was definitely, I was very fortunate for that reason, because it was an uphill battle otherwise, to say the least. We were, a lot of the industry, coming out of, say, Boulder, Colorado, et cetera, was very focused on natural and organic and, things like that. And so not necessarily looking at what I was doing as in line with that movement, so to speak. But we weren't a mainstream food company either, right? And we also weren't like a gourmet artisanal food company either, right? So we kind of sat in this bucket that I don't know that many people knew how to put us into or what to put us into. Furthermore, because I was a diabetic, I think a lot of people immediately associated the cereal with things like Ensure shakes or other sorts of things which they perceived as not selling well or not going to sell well, or whatever the case may be. I still don't know what the sales of Ensure shakes are. They could be doing fantastic for all I know. But I kept hearing, I kept getting looped into this, oh, you're like an Ensure shakes guy, and no one wants that kind of stuff. So I was really lucky that this buyer, I think she saw the opportunity and she jumped on it. And then from there, it was a bit easier, right? Because once we got into Whole Foods market, and the cereal sold well there, I think we quickly became one of the fastest selling brands in Whole Foods market. Then it was before you have sales data, you're really trying to sell people on an idea, on a dream, and on yourself, right? Once you have sales data, you kind of have market validation. You can take it elsewhere, and it's quasi incontrovertible evidence. So the data then started to speak for itself.
Amazing. What do you think most people misunderstand about how a product actually moves off the shelf in a grocery store?
Many ways that I could go with that question, Mike. I think maybe a couple big, a couple of things that I would state. I think, and I have no way to prove this, but especially in the early stage, that word of mouth moves more units than anything else does. And so you can spend all day long working on your own advertising and et cetera, et cetera. But I think ultimately, if you have a great product, consumers recommend it to one another. Some people love recommending things to other people and will tell 20 different people about your thing, and then those people will go buy it, et cetera. I think that is the number one kind of force for driving sales, driving growth, basically getting off the shelf, right? Once you're on the shelf. Outside of that, I think that the basic building blocks of marketing are super important, right? Basically, the 4 Ps, right? And in particular, obviously, you have to be at a price that makes sense, both for you and your business, but also for the consumer that you're going after. I think that you have to be in the right place in the first place, right? If you have a really, as we did, kind of premium priced.
This episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much underdelivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadhva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the consumer VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes.
Cereal, better for you cereal, Catalina Crunch cereal. You're probably like Whole Foods is a great place to be selling it. There are other stores like a corner liquor store that, in theory you could convince to put the cereal in there, right? Or like a convenience store. That may not be the right place for your product to be, right? So I think getting that right is important. I mean, I think getting the packaging right is obviously very important as well. So you're communicating to your target consumer what it is that they should, why they should be buying the product, what's in it for them, what the product is, et cetera. And so I think those things as well as the product itself are key. And then there's just the selling environment. I definitely am guilty of underestimating how much where you are on the shelf and what part of the shelf you're on, in what set you're in, what you stand next to on the shelf. All those things also have a big impact on how fast you sell.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And when did it make sense for you to expand categories beyond cereal?
Yeah. So first went into we have a line of protein snack mixes, and basically it's like Chex Mix made high protein. We take our cereal, mix it with cashews, almonds, pecans, etc. Some cheese crisps, some chickpea flour based pretzels we make, toss it in seasonings like honey mustard, Parmesan garlic, cheddar, etc. And sell that as a savory snack, right? So that was the first extension we went into. It was simple. We had found that a lot of people were telling us that they loved our cereal, but they were actually snacking on it. And that's a theme to this day, is that more people actually snack on our cereal than eat it out of a bowl with milk. And I had not expected that at first, because I had mostly started the company to eat it for breakfast. But yes. Yeah, exactly. Yep. But we sell our cereal in a stand-up pouch. So it's easy to open. It's easy to close. It's easy to get, it's not like a bag and box, which is harder to access. But then there were a lot of people that were like, hey, I'd love to snack on this. I snack on it sometimes, but I prefer salty snacks. would you consider making like a salty snack version? And people were bringing up other things they were snacking on. And so it made a lot of sense to get into snack mix. The other thing about that kind of extension or new category, however you want to put it, was it was the consumer was asking for it, but it also runs on the same lines that our existing products run on. So it's not like inventing a whole new production process. It didn't require getting too deep into any sort of new manufacturing technology, et cetera. So I think it was like relatively close in from a hardness to do perspective.
Got it. No, that's that makes a lot of sense, and that also that just hearing that people were actually snacking on the cereal instead of consuming it traditionally with milk and everything makes sense in terms of being easily able to, or seems like easily able to, expand to other categories within snacking, and also introducing salty snacks and everything. Which, yeah, that's amazing. Personally, I mean, for me, the salty snacks are just unbelievable. That's for me. I understand once you kind of had gotten to Whole Foods and that was performing really well, it was easier getting into other retailers. What was kind of the next steps there? And at what point did you actually introduce like the next SKUs? What did it make sense? Because still, tying up capital, producing new SKUs, and also the R&D process. How do you think about sequencing and timing?
Yeah. I think so. It depends on what you're launching, right? I mean, you can divide things into new flavors, which are very close in and can be more simple to execute, right? Versus entirely new categories, which can be very complicated, right? And things in the middle, like new pack sizes and new formats, et cetera. And so I think that a couple of things. We started out with flavor expansion on cereal. That was easy and simple from an execution standpoint, but it also made a lot of sense because that's what our consumers were asking us for, right? I mean, the number one request we would always get is, and we still get, is like, hey, can you make a XYZ flavor of the cereal that we don't have, right? I had in my head when I started the company really Cocoa Puffs, and I thought we would just ever make like chocolate cereal. We have a dark chocolate cereal. It's our second most popular, right? And so I didn't actually realize, people are going to want all these flavors. But then I said, people wanted cinnamon, and then they wanted, we have blueberry muffin, which sells really well. We have honey graham, right? We have fruity, et cetera. And so we started down the road of making more flavors because that's what consumers were telling us they wanted. Then we got into snack mix because it was like a salty adjacent to cereal. And then from there, I think when you go into new categories, and we'd also gotten into different pack sizes, right? So we started selling into the club channel, and the club channel typically is optimized for larger pack sizes, right? So we got into new pack sizes. We made some single serve pack sizes, et cetera. And then as we started to grow, we started to look at new categories as well. I think new categories are more tricky just because of the executional effort involved, which I think can be more than you first think, right? What I mean by that is like you can have a new category which dictates the use of a large number of different ingredients because the ingredients that work well to make cereal may not work well to bake dough or something like that, right? And so you're then looking at, so what are the ingredients I need for this specific application? That then leads you down the rabbit hole of sourcing all sorts of new ingredients, as well as the technical aspect of learning how those ingredients work. You then on the sales side, you have now maybe a new category, so a new set of buyers that you're going after as well, right? And if this product is the right fit in a different channel instead of your current channels, you have new channels that you're going after, and so on and so forth. I think that getting into new categories, it definitely ups the business complexity a lot, and I think is a high intensity endeavor. It can obviously de-risk your business, and obviously it can help I mean, it can reward you if you do a great job. You're helping consumers out in some way, right? And ideally, you have some strategy behind it, right? Where you have your existing consumers and you're trying to get into a new day part in their life, right? Or you're trying to bring in new consumers that your current product doesn't appeal to. Whatever the strategy is around it, if you execute it well, that obviously can do wonders for you too. But it's not an easy endeavor.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I talk to some investors, and obviously everyone's different, but the idea of building a platform, sometimes it can scare them because it's like, hey, you have like, I really want just like single category products and then exit to, strategic because you have your kind of single category instead of building like a platform, for example, and being in different categories. But I also I understand that it also is de-risking, and I mean, I just love your products as well, and so I just think that it's very makes a lot of sense as well in terms of capturing the consumer at a different time of day, where cereal tends to be morning, although they're snacking. But then you have salty snacks, which might be something for more so the afternoon, for example. So that's really cool, really cool. Talk to me a little bit about the time that you almost quit Catalina Crunch. There was a couple of times you almost quit, but there was one time due to manufacturing issues.
Yep. We had, so when I started the company, I was insistent on putting the cereal into a stand-up pouch. I'd grown up eating cereals and all the cereals were in a bag in a box. I hated how when I took the bag out of the box and then opened the bag, it could be hard to put the bag back into the box. And then that was annoying and frustrating and the cereal could go stale, et cetera, et cetera. I knew that we were going to have a premium cereal because we're using a lot of protein powder in our cereal, and that stuff is a lot more expensive than wheat flour, for example, right? And so I was thinking, all right, we got to deliver the best experience. It's got to be in a stand-up pouch. All the companies that were making cereal at the time were putting it into a bag and a box, and so we ended up having to split the manufacturing process into one partner putting it into, making the cereal squares themselves, and then the second partner that was packaging it and coating it. And what I found there is there weren't very many people that could do those last two steps. And so I ended up finding this co-manufacturer. They were one of the largest in America. They do a lot of the airline snacks. I think the founder or the owner was a type 1 diabetic, and he was very, he loved what I was doing. But it didn't make business sense for them, right? They were packaging millions of stuff a day, and here I was asking for 20,000 units a month or something like that, right? At the very early days. So they were having trouble with their machinery and getting it to work. And so that eventually they said, you know what, we can't do this anymore for you, sorry. And at that point, I was like, shoot, they didn't want to do it anymore. I couldn't find anyone else that could do it. And I was like, man, I'm either going to have to go do this myself or stop doing it, right? Or shut down the business. And so I started looking for space. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I'd never done it before. But rented 3,000 square feet in a office park with like an office in the front and a warehouse in the back. I bought a cot off Amazon. I slept in the office and started, coating and packaging the cereal in the back. And that was, I think, a blessing in disguise. It was incredibly time consuming and challenging. But it made us much more nimble, right? In terms of the flavors we could come out with, how quickly we could do it, et cetera. But that was the time when I almost threw in the towel.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds very frustrating, but also at the same time, as you say, like a great, learning experience. I guess it's easy to say that once it all has happened, but but how do you also think on the R&D side and launch new products, even with your current catalog of products? How do you balance taste versus function? Because I feel like you were one of, in this last few years, one of those, seems like functions everywhere in terms of what a brand needs to be, especially since coming back from Expo West. But it seems like you were, quite early when it came to function. How do you think about function versus taste?
Yeah. We talk about a lot about this inside Catalina. It is hard. It is hard to know how to get it right. It's hard to get it right. Luckily, I'm not the only one sitting in the kitchen trying to figure out how to make stuff taste good. We got a great team that can do a better job than I ever could with this kind of stuff. So that has really moved the ball forward for us. I think that, to your point, if you start to add too much of certain functional ingredients, fibers, proteins, etc., it makes it hard to taste good. On the other hand, if you take something that exists on shelf and just add a gram or two of protein, you can make something that still tastes very good, but is not moving the needle on nutritional attributes really, right? And then you're just asking yourself, like, am I in business really to make people's lives better, or am I really just in business to sell this thing, right? And if so, how much of it am I really going to sell? And so you have to balance it. I mean, I think it depends on the category and the eating occasion, first of all. There are times when people are much more willing to compromise on taste for function. Then there are other times where they're much less willing to compromise on taste for function. So I think you need to identify where along that spectrum you sit inside the consumer's mind. And that depends on what consumer you're going after, and when you intend on them eating it, what mindset they're in, et cetera. Two, I think, is who you're going after. If you're going after type 1 diabetics, as an example, they're going to be much more willing to compromise on taste for function, quote unquote. If you're going after, quote unquote, the 50th percentile American on the question, they're going to be much less willing to compromise, right? So I think that's a balancing act. And I think there's no easy answer other than to say the thing, your snack or your product has to be meaningfully better on function to stand out. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to stand out. And if it's not meaningfully better, are you really making people's lives better? At the same time, then you have to make it taste at least good enough, right? And what good enough is depends on, I think, how many people you want to sell it to. And I think if you just can't, if you personally are not going to eat it, then you can't be selling it, right? Even if you are personally going to eat it, that doesn't mean that it's good enough. And ultimately, if you can't make it taste good enough, maybe it's just not the right time for that product, right? And you just have to give up on what you're trying to make and do something different.
It seems like function today, which was probably very different when you first started, but it's kind of infiltrating almost every category in consumer goods. Do you think that there's a limit in terms of categories where the functional benefit, it doesn't make sense to have, for example, a functional product in?
This episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much underdelivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadhva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the consumer VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes.
I think that, I guess, one thing I was thinking about is, like, people they want to be getting the best stuff, right? Whatever that category is that they're buying in, right? And so in certain categories, like in automobiles, if you have a used car and you go to the dealer wanting to buy a new car, like, you're going to be looking for, now it's 2026, you bought your car in 2020, what new technology is available in your car, right? Like, how can my car be more functional, for lack of a better word, right? Like, can it drive itself? Can it drive itself on the highways? How does it help me avoid getting into accidents? Like, can it do its own maintenance? Yada, yada, right? I think in food, there's kind of a similar aspect that's just less well recognized or well understood, that's also changed, which is now with this interest in health and like people realizing that what they eat impacts more than just do I feel good or not, do I feel full or not in the moment, right? But can have longer term impacts or shorter term impacts on how they feel, the quote function. They're now looking for more. They're looking for more better. I do think that there are situations in which the category might be optimized to deliver one type of functional benefit, and you're trying to deliver a different one, maybe in a way that contradicts a category norm. And that might be challenging. Or you could be doing something where you're trying to deliver that functional benefit when it would be better designed to be delivered through a different category, so to speak, right? Like a different mechanism. So function can definitely be taken too far. Function can definitely be the wrong function, I think, can be put into the wrong category. But I don't think there's per se a limit on consumer outcomes, for example, right? I mean, they always want better, and I don't know if we're ever going to be, if we ever can say, okay, we have the best possible food and there's nothing to be done.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, do you think also there are products where it seems like on paper and certainly in their marketing materials that there is functional benefit, however, there actually really maybe isn't as much, or it's actually a lot lighter than one would anticipate?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are examples, not to get into the negative, right? But there are examples of companies that say, hey, we make, protein cereal. Then you look at the amount of protein in it, and it's like, it's like 4 grams of protein in a 60-gram serving size. Like, it's not really meaningful, right? There are other examples where, like, and again, I don't know much about this, right? But like fiber-based sodas, and how is your body benefiting from or processing or digesting the fiber when it comes in soda form, right? Versus when it comes in the form of food. And so are you getting the satiety benefit from fiber in soda that you would get from fiber in an apple, as an example, right? Like a food versus a beverage, right? So are we actually delivering? And I think there's so much unknown about the gut microbiome and the different types of fiber. There's a lot of way to go there. But there could be examples where, it's like maybe the fiber soda is delivering you fiber, but it's digested in a different way, which really isn't that meaningful for you. And so we should rethink whether this is something to be drinking, right?
Yeah, something that I've been thinking about is on the nutritional facts section, are there, just saying, for example, about protein, is there something more deeper on the gut is quite as functional? I think it says kind of the whey protein added or something added to the product. That's something that I've been doing. Seems like everything kind of in our world, so to speak. Call outs in the marketing when it comes to function, and sometimes I get confused and have a hard time understanding if there actually is a functional benefit or not.
Got it. Yeah. I think, like, an example maybe is like Celsius, for example, the energy drink, and maybe energy drinks in general. But like, I think Celsius on the bottom of the can has like 3 consumer benefits that it talks about. If I recall, one of them is like helps burn fat or helps boost metabolism or something like that, right? So in that sense, they're trying to take an ingredient. I don't know if they're laddering that up from caffeine or some other ingredient, right? But they're taking some ingredient and then trying to translate it to, okay, how does that help Mike or help Krishna throughout their daily journey, right? And I think that's a valuable thing to do.
Totally. On Catalina, you decided to do a rebrand, I believe last year. Why did you decide to do changing your packaging and change it? I imagine that was a pretty long process.
Yeah. So when I started the company, ago, because we've done several. So when I started the company, low sugar and low carb were very important, as a type 1 diabetic. And so I was very focused in on that messaging. I started to sell the cereal though, right? And I realized, oh, there's a lot of people that are eating our cereal because it's high in protein and because it's high in fiber. And then there were a lot of people that were getting on keto and they were eating our products because they were keto friendly. And actually, the buyer at Whole Foods is, strongly encouraged me to add keto friendly to the packaging in big letters as a way of appealing to that kind of growing trend, right? So the way I would look at it is consumers can change how they talk about something, even though they're really talking about the same thing. And as a brand, you want to be evolving your messaging to keep up with how consumers are talking about it. So the most recent kind of rebrand we did, we went back to focusing on protein, fiber, and low sugar is kind of like the three core, kind of functional attributes of the product, and putting those front and center across the middle of our packaging. And then people really, the taste is really important. And so then we made a really big bowl of cereal, looks delicious with a splash of milk, that sort of thing to illustrate the taste, right? And that took us away from the previous packaging, which had keto friendly on the front, it was big, it was plastered on there. And the reason we did that was, again, it all goes back to consumers. It all goes back to talking to consumers, understanding how consumers are thinking, and then acting based on that. In this case, we had a number of consumers that I was talking to that were saying, "Hey, I love your cereal. When I'm on keto, I eat it." And I'm like, "Well, why? What do you mean when you're on keto, you eat it? Like you don't eat it otherwise?" And I started to realize that they were thinking of it as something that they would eat while on keto, and that was kind of boxing us out of just being something that was a good fit for them to eat as a snack or as a breakfast, right? And we didn't want to be pigeonholed into that way of thinking. And so that's why we made the packaging change.
Do you find that riding a trend, even balancing that when it comes to, keto friendly, for example, and talking about a trend versus not, which is right now in the current packaging form, it's not talking about a trend. It's call outs in terms of just what you are. Mm-hmm. But do you find that early on when you're starting a business, it's actually really helpful to kind of capitalize on a trend that's happening, and then later not kind of leave that out because you kind of have reached scale or a broader audience?
This episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much under-delivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand-beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadhva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the Consider VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes.
Well, yeah, I definitely think that when you're small, it's likely better to go deep and narrow with who you're going after, and make a great product for a specific group of people, because you have a very limited resources. And you can, if you focus really tightly on who you're going after, you can make a dramatic improvement for that small group of people, right? Afterwards, then business gets bigger. You start to build out teams that, or at least have people that do marketing and sales and operations and finance and supply chain, et cetera. Then you can start to broaden your messaging, and you can go after additional groups of consumers, right? Rather than just the one initial group. I think that you should always just talk in the terms that your target consumer is speaking in, because that's the most effective way of communicating towards them. So to your point, there could be a trend like keto friendly that's going on, that's a great fit, or there could not be, right? I mean, like, I don't I don't know that there's. I think that these things like keto friendly can grow in popularity so quickly that they can be a great way for you to build the awareness of your brand, right? And so I think it's good to recognize and kind of take advantage of that, but it has to be aligned with what you are at its core, right? Like you can't, in my opinion, it would be ill advised. Me as a type 1 diabetic, it makes sense to go from low sugar, low carb to keto friendly to now protein, fiber, and low sugar. Like it's all the same thing, right? It's just talked about differently. I don't think we'd be well advised to like now go next to gut health if gut health became popular, right? Or start talking about the something totally or talk about how our cereal helps you sleep or something like that, right? Like that's in a totally different direction.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm always curious about how companies, when you do have a trend that actually is very much aligned in terms of your product, how to think about the relationship between that trend and the company, in terms of how to think about your own positioning for it, because of course trends come and go. Keto obviously was huge 10 years ago, even though I feel like as we talk about protein, how about fiber, it's very keto centric, very much alignment there. But I just always kind of find it fascinating how to even think about a trend versus a company, not getting too wrapped up in the trend or pulling back. So I appreciate that, Krishna. A final question.
I was gonna say one thing there, actually, real quick, Mike. I think that for me, it's about it's like trend versus fad, right? Is two sides of a coin there.
Yeah.
And to me, a fad is something that's growing and its growth is being driven by its own growth. In other words, it's becoming popular. People are noticing it's popular, so they want to try it too. But there's no underlying there. There's no credible reason to be adopting it or doing it. It's just it's popular and it's becoming more popular because it's popular. That goes up and then it comes back down when the popular people move on to something else, and then you're no longer chasing that thing, but you're chasing something else, right? A trend is something that has a durable cause and effect based reason for being in existence, right? And so, like, I give a good example, in my opinion, like gluten free. To folks that have celiac disease or a gluten intolerance, gluten free is the great reason for gluten free products to exist, and it's a trend. For people that do not have gluten intolerance or celiacs and misattribute other symptoms to gluten, that is putting yourself on shaky footing, right? And so I think gluten-free maybe 15 years ago grew tremendously in popularity on the backs of this kind of mainstream interest in gluten almost as a fad. Now it's kind of come back down and is growing slowly on the basis of the real, really, I think mostly celiac disease and some people that have a gluten intolerance. So if I were sitting in someone's shoes trying to figure that out, I would be asking, what's like the cause and effect that's driving this? Is it really, quote, better for a certain group of people or new for a certain group of people? And if so, it's really worth leaning into. If you can't credibly say that that's happening, I think it's probably worth avoiding.
So what's keto? Is keto do you think that keto is a fad or a trend?
I think with keto, I think it has both components again, right? I think that the underlying fact pattern is that if you eat in adherence with a keto friendly way of eating, I think you can reset or eliminate your type 2 diabetes if you have it. I think you can lose a lot of weight. If you're in shape, I think it'll help you stay in shape. So I think there are a lot of good reasons to eat that way. It's also very difficult to eat that way. And so I think there's a portion of the population that is able to sustain eating that way. And then I think there's another portion that's not, right? So I think it similarly has both a trend element and a fad element in one. But again, I think that it's a great way of eating. And so I don't feel like there's anything wrong again in going after it.
That's fair. That's fair. Final question for you. What's one book that's inspired you personally and one book that's inspired you professionally?
Yep. That is a hard question. As I was giving this some thought, I I read a lot of books. I don't read any books purely for personal reasons, unfortunately. So I'm going to merge it into one. I really like the book Man's Search for Meaning. It was written by an Auschwitz survivor. Highly recommend it to anyone who has not read it. It talks about meaning and purpose as kind of like a fundamental drive in human behavior. And for me, it has two things going for it. One is like the story of surviving Auschwitz, which was fascinating and just frankly incredible. But two, and it just gets back to purpose, right? Which is if you're operating a business to make money, it's really hard to succeed. You have to have, in my opinion, an underlying purpose in way that you're making the world better, that you strongly believe in. That I think that it's really important that you truly believe what you're doing is doing that, and then that you're sharing that with your employees, your investors, your retail partners, your ingredient vendors, everyone else, right? So I took an enormous amount away from that book and recommend it to anyone that has the chance to read it.
I thank you so much for sharing this book. We've had a couple others. I know Rishi Garb also shared this book as well. Shout out to Rishi. I think he came back on. I think he came on the show in like 2021. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's also, I appreciate what you said as well in terms of starting a business and the reasons why to start a business as well. If it's just for the purposes of making money, it's probably gonna be pretty hard to be successful. Not that there aren't people that are successful if that's their sole purpose. But if there's meaning behind it, trying to make the world a better place, see an opportunity that isn't there, then you have a chance. Krishna, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. It's been great talking with you.
It's been so great talking with you. I'm going to stop right there.